G'day and welcome to another episode of the HSEQ Leaders Podcast. And we have Pierre De Villiers on today. Pierre actually had the honor of being the first person on our podcast, and we were super excited for it. And he was the first person to put his hand up, and I didn't press record. So we've gone forward a few months. We've forgotten really what we've talked about the first time. So it's all going to be fresh. But Pierre, g'day, and welcome to the podcast again.
Hey, how you doing, John? And what I can guarantee is, because my brain is the way it is, that all my answers will be different to the first answers that I have.
We know the format that we typically run through. So Pierre, fill us in. Tell us the cliff notes, the short story on your career, and where you got to where you are now.
Okay, so it's been interesting for me because I've been through phases of quite large leaps when I wasn't ready, and then some smaller steps that sort of helped me pace my career growth. I know my first job in health and safety, I definitely didn't think I was ready for it, but others did, and it was sitting downstairs not far from where you are with a coffee. With a big oil and gas construction engineering business in 2007 and 8. And would you like a job in health and safety on the biggest LNG project in Australia ever? And I said, yes, please. I'm happy to do that. That then sort of pushed my career across into different management roles after a few years, which I wasn't really ready for. So I took a medium-term management role a couple of years after that in an office that I wasn't really ready for. You know, it's a bit like sports teams and the military. You work within a team, and then all of a sudden you've got to manage a team or your mates and things like that. And supervisors go through a lot of that, and I wasn't really ready for it. But 2 years after that, I took another role I definitely wasn't ready for. It was probably 10 years ahead of my time. A global role, looking after a big global team in a big company based back in the UK. But that really sort of made my career, because I did my MBA before I took that role. And it really allowed me to change my language and my thinking when we originally talk about conventional HSE or safety or OHS. And I went from this fairly evangelical person around safety glasses and boots and how dare you, to the risk discussion around business and enterprise risk and supporting the growth and survival of the business, making it about people, of course. And then a couple of years later, my career completely shot into renewables and zero carbon transition, which really again pivoted my career into the opportunities. So there's a couple of things. There's some negative ones in there as well, around pushing a bit harder with a lot of senior people than I probably should have, around decision making and what is our capacity to take risk as a business. And I didn't really fully understand what was the commercial impact of some of my advice, which I think is really something that our industry have to do a lot more of these days. And then also biting off much more than I can chew, and then having to learn the hard way to do those roles. But yeah, that's it in a nutshell.
Just on that biting off more than you can chew, I think it's probably, pre-safety. Fill us in on that, because you've had an actually incredible life prior to your current life as a safety professional.
Okay, yeah. So how old was I? I think I just turned 16, or I was just after 16. I was walking out of school in a beautiful place called Grimsby in England, and many people would know about it. It's now a renewable industrial hub, whereas back then we just finished the fishing industry, and we were like, what do we do now? And I walked into a military recruitment center, and I said, what's the hardest thing I can do? And they said, here's the Royal Marine Commandos, and off I went. So yeah, I joined the Commandos at that age, and then I did a lot of stuff around aircraft and vessels, and I was a rifleman for quite a few years on the front line. We went to Iraq and did a few different things. So yeah, you could call it fairly unsafe activities in a sense, if you look at risk in that sense. But then I went into oil and gas, rope access, NDT, painting and blasting, and literally fell into safety. So that was that's that in a nutshell. Yeah.
And well, that's the biting off more you can chew. Maybe that's where that came from, Pierre.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I've always
And
been a bit like that, actually.
well, what about outside of safety, outside of professional capacity, mate? Fill us in. Who are you? What do you do outside of work? I know you work all hours that God gives, but outside of that, mate, what do you do? Who's
Yeah,
Pierre?
look, I've tried to I've tried to now finally, after all these years, find a much better balance. I know in those roles I talked about before, which shot me way too fast, too far. I had to sacrifice a lot of time with the family and my friends, and developing and looking after myself, especially my mental health. That's one thing I've really come to terms with, is the mental health piece for professionals that are overly ambitious. So I'm a dad, and I try to be a good friend and a husband. That's about it. You know, my two boys are 5 and 9. They're amazing, and they're going to be much better versions of me, and learn the things that I learned much earlier. And my husband Natalie, who's been a nurse for most of her life, and now she's a mother, so she's keeping herself busy with all of those things. I enjoy a bit of travel. I enjoy property. I enjoy learning about interest rates rises and falls, hopefully, and sport. So I'm an avid follower of rugby. I used to play a lot at a fairly high level in the UK and South Africa. So yeah, that's me.
And you know, you talk about mental health, and I know because we've discussed this, and being a learning as you've gotten older, and I think it is one of those things you learn as you get older. But what's the piece of advice you'd give your younger self if you could go back, Pierre, through many of the iterations of your
So
younger self? What would it be as a professional?
yeah. Every year I keep saying I'm a shadow of my former shadow of my former shadow of my former self. When I'm going in a good way, I hope. You know, it's like a snake shedding its skin, but not that I'm a snake, hopefully. So look, I share this openly, especially in my previous role, where psychosocial risk management was really at the pinnacle of the focus. And in my current role, it's a bit different now. But what I learned, I think it was 2016 and 17, is that I'd made my life very complicated because I was so ambitious, and because we were starting a family, and we had properties, and I had a role, a high level executive QHSE role, and a startup business, and all these things. Just this is pre-COVID, and I basically had full burnout, or a mental breakdown, whatever you want to call it, while working at that time, because I just overloaded myself. And the one thing that sort of triggered me and pushed me over the edge was that sense of control. Now, if you think about it, in our function, our industry, the roles that we do, we get involved so much in different areas, and our sphere of control is actually quite small. The influence piece is as big as you want to make it, but the control is fairly small. And what happened is I lost touch of what that sphere of control was actually about, in terms of my life, in terms of our startup business, my family, my kids, and then in my work. So I lost complete focus on what that sphere of control was, and it just sent me into a spiral. And the problem is, when you're in a spiral and you don't talk to anyone, it just keeps going down and down and down and down. And we, I don't want to talk about men or women or whatever, us people in senior roles don't really want to go, oh, I've got an issue, who can I talk to? And by the time I started talking to someone, it was too late. So I had to really realize that my health suffered severely through not reaching out, through going into a spiral, and assuming I had all this control. As a young, ambitious professional in our function, if you assume you have a lot of control, you're gonna go into a lot of pain points. So I think that's just one thing I learned.
I think that's so important. I think that's where the ambition, right? It can ride over. It can paint over the cracks that are forming because you run on ambition. You run on that high performance, and I think that's easy to forget. But you said before, though, Pierre, around learnings around the advice that you've given as a professional as well, as you've developed in your career. For a safety professional, what's a piece of advice or learning that you would give as they're progressing in their career?
So the one thing I've always had to try and work with other people, because I've done quite a bit of mentoring and supporting others to build up through their career, and I'm actually really enjoying their success. It sounds really strange, but the more I see those people succeed, the sort of more fulfilled I feel. And I don't know, hopefully that's not my age, but that's just a thing. So the one thing I didn't really learn until it was much further in my career is that each bit of risk that we see. So I use risk in a very holistic context. Now, risk professionals will use it in a different way, but I look at QHSE and business and opportunities and the work that we do as risk. And from my perspective is when you try and address a challenge or a problem or an issue, talking about compliance, yes, is one thing, and black and white, it's in the legislation or it's in our procedures or standards, that's one thing. But every time you look at a challenge in a business, however big or small it is, always make sure you step back and assess it within its context, because taking a huge issue in a business or an incident or a new tender or a huge problem with the client, if you don't take it within its context and you just assess it as it is on its own, you could potentially go way off on a tangent in terms of giving the business the advice it needs. And don't forget, the advice that we give now to businesses can be just as dangerous to us as it is to CFOs and CEOs and companies in our roles. So always assess the context within that something is within in terms of the risk and issue that you have in a business, and make sure you assess all the capable changes and mitigations that you've got in relation to that context, not just here's an issue, we have a big engineering problem, it's going to cost $2 million to fix it, it's a $5,000 job, you can't do it without making these changes. Always look at the context of what you're looking at, because that then gives you, I think, a better perspective to give you advice.
Absolutely, yeah, rather than chasing that tangent. Absolutely. I know the answer to this question, but having worked with you on the other side, but what do you look for, mate, when you're hiring in your team? And you've had some pretty amazing people in your team that we both know of, but what do you look for when you're hiring professionals, mate?
So this is probably the answer that's changed a little bit from when we first spoke, because and that's only because I'm looking at this from a perspective also outside of Australia, not just Australia. But if I'm looking at it just in our context, I'm looking at attitude and the capacity someone has got to be agile in their role. Because in no business at this time do we ask the same thing from people all the time, especially in our roles. So I look at attitude, a sense of humor, ability to sort of have a bit of courage under some adversity, whether it's workload or timeframes and priorities. So it's always about attitude. If I can have a good conversation with someone and we can have a coffee and just discuss as colleagues, then that's fantastic for me. The rest of it is really gravy in terms of technical competence, because those things we can coach and assist with in the role. However, that being said, if you're recruiting into a highly technical role with serious demands where someone has to hit the ground running, a great attitude is only going to get you so far. And some of these quotes that we've seen in the books that we read, that culture will kill a system anytime. It's the same the other way around. If we don't have someone who knows the system and has the technical competence, they can have a great attitude, but they can come into the role and just sink because they don't know what they're doing, and we don't have the time to coach them and mentor them. So this is probably where I pivot a little bit around great attitude. That's for me is the best thing. They want to learn, they can soak up, and they can be a sponge. But if we don't meet that basic level of competence for the role, then we're really going to have a challenge. And in the market today, where there's desperate recruiting, fast recruiting, please land people in the roles now. We need X, Y, and Z. The client's paying for this. We need someone. This is where the danger is. And I've seen it where you put someone in a role that isn't suitable, but they've got a great attitude, and then 6 months later, the damage that's caused is really hard to repair.
That's really funny, or really interesting, I should say, from when we've last talked, because there's also context, right? So the space that you're playing in, people often say to me, safety is transferable. And we've talked about this, right? Like, safety is transferable. It is transferable 100% to an extent, right? And there is that risk if you go 100% on attitude, you're setting someone up for failure. And the impact that can have on someone and their confidence as a professional long term, because that attitude is, as you said, is only going to get you so far. And look, I've seen that sometimes as well. It's not biting off more you can chew. There's an argument for that, but biting off more you can chew and then setting yourself up for failure. And there's a fine line between that. And I think it's something that I'm consciously aware of as well, especially when we recruit safety in technical capacity, because it is a different skill set that's required. So absolutely resonate with that, mate. But and look, we've talked about leadership. I know this is important for you. So what's leadership to you, and how do you lead, mate?
So I've had some really good mentors around this topic, both in Australia and out, and I still talk to them now, and I ask them for advice, and we bounce some challenges around. Sometimes at 6:30 in the morning at City Beach in the winter, in the water, and I'm thinking, what am I doing? So for me, it's always been, I know this sounds a bit old school, but that umbrella of protection, enablement, support, and having the protection to be able to step out of your comfort zone and the courage with someone who's got your back. This sounds really cliche, but I've always had leaders that I've created connections with that have got my back, even if I step a little bit out of my comfort zone and I might get it wrong. And they've gone, look, actually, Pierre, this time let's try again, but just pivot a little bit here and there. So leadership to me, it'll always boil down to trust. When I was in the military playing rugby, where I am now, you need to know what the person to your left and right are, what they're capable of and what they're not. So therefore you can pass the ball or the task or the challenge or the opportunity to them because they're capable of it. So the ability to trust people to do or not do what they can and can't is the first thing for me. What I say to people now is that it's not my role to micromanage you or my role to sit down with you and hold your hand and go, now let's do A, let's do B, let's do C. We can do that when you're onboarded and you need a bit of help. But at the end of the day, I am here to light your skill set and to let you run and to light your fire so you can exceed in this business and take my job from me in a couple of years or whatever. That's what I'm here for. So leadership is about trust, empowerment, caring for your team, and showing that empathy. I've seen post-COVID that empathy has worn down on people. I think I've seen it where they've become a little bit more abrupt around what they expect from their teams and from themselves. And this whole computer piece has led to that as well. I think all these team meetings, let's do everything remotely. I can't read your body language. You can't say to me outside the meeting room, right, I think you pushed a bit hard there. Let's go back in and sort this out. We can't do that. We're on the screen now, and I think that's worn back some of our leadership skills, but also improved some others.
Oh, look, no doubt. Like, it's definitely improved, I guess, efficiencies, right? But then we see it in our business. Right? We always push for face-to-face. I mean, I know you were pushing for this to be face-to-face. I just didn't have a cameraman handy, mate, but you're absolutely right. And I think it's really easy, it's something I'm grappling with as well. Different industry, but, moving away from WA, having to still be a leader remotely. And I'm a big believer you still need to have those touch points in person. And also to be able to back your team as well. So no, I 100% agree with that. But you touched on that about influences in your life, Pierre, and people that you lean on. Who's some people that influenced you in your professional life? If you want to share names, but or at least lessons.
Yeah,
learned.
I can do. Look, I'll talk about people rather than names. So they don't get the blame for all of my
You're not naming names. That's it. Yeah.
No. So there's a gentleman who we go swimming with at City Beach on these days, and he's an executive coach, but also around business improvement and safety and lean and some of that stuff there. And he has always been a sounding board to me for the last 15 years. And he was actually sitting there when I had that first coffee back in 2007 or 8. And he was like, this guy's got a great attitude. And I thought, yeah, okay, what's next? And he's always been a coach and a good sounding board for me. And we still talk now about all these things that are challenges and opportunities. There's another colleague of mine, he was my manager at Leighton Contractors back in those days in WA. And he's ex-military, a guy called Simon. And we still talk today. And he was probably that light bulb for me around corporate governance, more corporate type of discussions, business-minded ideas and solutions, rather than the transactional and conventional health and safety. So he really sort of changed my mindset into how we should be positioning this for the business rather than for ourselves. And this is my audit report and my investigation, and let's all put our hands up and be safe.
Knowing Simon and knowing you, I can see as a third party here, I can see a lot of similarities between the two.
My goatee's never been as good as his, though. I've always tried with a goatee, but it's never been as good as his. And then in between that, I was at Subsea 7, and there was a manager there when we changed from HSEQ to Subsea 7. He was my line manager, brought me in on a few of these projects, and has been a really good mentor to me in those days around again, just being really effective in your role, whatever you're doing, and making sure that you're earning your keep in your role. And he was a really good mentor to me. Look, there's a few others. I reread a lot of James Kerr and those skills, those soft skills around leadership. But unfortunately, most things I've had to learn apart from those guys is by mistake. And what I try and do now is share with others some of those ideas that I've learned by mistake. That's sort of it.
Yeah. It's the best way to learn sometimes, within reason, unless someone's life.
Yeah. Omelets and eggs and all that.
That's it. But Pierre, we've also talked about this, mate, outside of the podcast. Where do you see the future being in safety and HSE? Where do you see it going?
Well, what I don't want to do is just peddle what everyone else is talking about on the internet. I can try my best not to do that. So I'll keep away from that topic until the end. I think so I met with some really senior people in the oil and gas space when I came back to Australia back in 2018, and they said, look, you should really look at these for your career because they're going to be the big need in the future, especially around approvals. So if you think about everything we've learned around legislation, regulations, ESG, and the big need now for green finance and approvals for any projects, I think the big focus is going to be a lot of us for our big tier one players, especially, is making sure that everything is in place for the regulators to approve our plans, whether it's NOPSEMA, whether it's DEMAs, all these different areas, aviation in particular, and now the EV space. It's going to be approvals to make sure all this stuff can happen. Hydrogen power plants, fast charging networks up and down WA, all those type of things, waste to energy. The piece to get that approved, Macquarie is a prime example, and the people trying to push a lot of that stuff in Australia. The approvals piece is huge, and the assurance is huge, and the compliance piece is huge. So what I don't want to do is take the key value away from health and safety, which is the on-ground people work, but I think the critical work, which is going to be the high-paid work as well, and the highly technical work, is that behind-the-scenes approvals and regulatory authorization for all the stuff happening in the future. Will we go round and round again with stop cards and stop work, and I care about you, and no one's to blame, and then everyone's to blame, and then it's the machines, and then it's the people. Sorry, I digress. But I think that will just circulate based on what is going to distract us next in industry, and as we know, right? So now we're talking about AI. Everyone is jumping up and down because I've tried it. I've gone to the chatbot and gone, do me a favor, do me a presentation on psychosocial risk management in the context of Monday morning at 2 o'clock because I'm tired. And I've got 20 slides. I've got 20 slides out of this thing. I'm going, we better be careful. So that's going to be the next thing. It's NOPSEMA are going to be going, did AI write this safety case or did you write it? What's going on? That could be the real issue, So I think that's unfortunately part of it is the whole automation of a lot of these activities that have depended on human experience and human judgment, because a lot of that now is on the internet. So we've got to look out for that.
Well, I guess and that's the thing, the whole AI thing. I mean, we use it as well, but it's about, having it as a tool. A tool itself is useless unless you know how to use it, right? So, and the people that are still highly paid are the people that are, the most efficient at using or most effective at using that tool. And also, interesting around that approval space. I've recently just recruited an approvals role, and it's a lot tougher because it's a different skill set, but also there's less people out there. Hence why, you're getting the remuneration of the most highly paid people, or the people that are in short supply and high demand. And I think that area is only seeing more demand. I mean, look at that from my case. 12 months ago, we had less demand, especially around ESG, than we do now. And I can imagine that you'll have that exponential in the next 12 months, 2 years as well.
So I met with, I was in KL last week, and I met with another colleague of mine who I've known for a long time from a big ESG recruitment business in Europe, and then they're expanding. And we had the similar discussion to this. It wasn't recorded, but it was about, especially in emerging markets in ESG, and I don't want to be disrespectful to AU, but we still are really in that infancy around knowing.
Absolutely.
Exactly. So we talked about, do these big players, because they're recruiting CSOs for their board, and do they know exactly what they're recruiting for when they're asking for someone about ESG skill set and background? Because all what happens is, and I'm telling you the truth, is that we say we've done all this stuff around environment and we've done all this auditing and internal governance, and then social. I go play badminton on a Sunday, so that's my social bit. Because the people don't really know exactly what that ESG piece is in terms of one person and their holistic skill set. So I think that's going to be a great opportunity for people who have worked in that space for a long time.
Absolutely. Well, Pierre, it's getting late, mate, and I want to thank you for jumping on again, second time. It's always a pleasure to have a chat with you, and mate, thank you again. And I'm looking forward to having a beer with you when I'm back from Brisbane in a few weeks.
Absolutely. I'll see you then.
All right. Thanks, mate. Thanks a lot for joining us for another episode of the Safety Leaders podcast. If you enjoyed it, make sure you reach out and connect with myself as well as Sundstrom Recruitment on LinkedIn. We are the specialists health and safety recruitment in WA. Looking forward to the next episode and maybe getting to know you. Cheers.